So I finished Future Radio and it wasn't as great as I hoped for, but still pretty decent. And a couple of things popped up in my head when I was going through it. The first being that it gave me a lot of Trino Line vibes, even though they don't really hit the same subjects. And it didn't really hit as hard. They could have got harder with it, but I guess that's not everybody's cup of tea. The second thing was more on the lines that even though I don't think it can compare with Cyanotype, I also liked it a lot more than the Newton title. So maybe if there's ever a fourth one, I'll like it even more than Cyanotype. I kind of doubt, but who knows, right? Future Radio feels kind of short and I finished in a couple of days, so because of that what I'll talk about is also kind of short and the spoiler sections will be small to normal. The setting is based on these robotic pigeons being super efficient and boosting the speed of any signal to the point everything was overhauled to use it. And then out of nowhere the pigeons started consuming all of it, basically killing any signal before it reaches their respective destinations. So basically any technical communication is dead. So one of their airports just became abandoned and the other one became like university that the cast goes to. This setting gets used in Cyanotype as well, and funny enough a huge portion of the soundtrack is actually moved over at the same time. It does the job well and it makes sense why it was transferred over. The VN is split into 5 sections, though really it's more like 7 to 8 for completion's sake. Overall each part was fine and it leads itself well, but they don't really hit a high outside of maybe like 3 moments, and I'd say only one of them felt paced well enough. I'd say maybe adding an extra 2 or 3 hours would have done them some good, and that's kind of funny coming from me because I'm usually in the opposite camp. Anyways, the first part revolves around the main character, Sora, creating these radios since he figured a way to bypass the signal eating pigeons, right? So he's giving them out to the rest of the cast. That includes Ishimaru, his best friend that has connections to the closed down electric store / warehouse due to the pigeons. He's got his immature side, and alongside Sora, and honestly it feels like them and the majority of the unnamed characters all have the switch where they all lose most of their social development. This is doubly so for Mizuki, his younger sister, but really she's mainly a Joe character which transfers over to her route. She pairs off well with Akina and Tsubaki, but for different reasons. Tsubaki is one of the professors alongside one of the programmers that helped develop the pigeons. Akina works at the coffee shop and is probably the least important in the cast outside of like 2 integral plot points. They could honestly be retconned without much trouble. And that's because she's the trigger for the next section. The final character is Kagi. She's the main girl and resides in the abandoned airport and gets the final radio that he has. The second part is about them finding that they're getting 1-minute broadcasts from the future every time at midnight. Eventually one of the broadcasts mentions something and the gang goes on trying to prevent it, and the way how is creating more radios because it just so happens that they affect the pigeons, and if there's a large enough disturbance they can resolve the dilemma altogether. A huge portion of the second is just the cast building up their relationships. The third section is them figuring out that there's more complications with what they're doing. I'll skip the rest because it's mainly built up for Kaguya. The last couple of scenes were done well, but it also felt like the pacing for the section was going by too fast. Part of it is kind of expected because you consider this like the first part that leads to the true route, but at the same time I felt like it was going by too fast to get the required push that it needed to even hit the true route itself. The 4th to 6th sections are the routes where they're all kind of useless except Tsubaki. She's the only one needed to unlock the true route. The other 2 give some hints on what's going on, but those are also given Tsubaki's route anyways. I think it would work if Tsubaki's route was locked until you did Akina since it's a gradual lead up. Akina's stuff gets brought up in the hidden section, so it'd be pretty funny if someone skipped her route altogether and just gets spoiled in 10 seconds. The route with Mizuki is just kind of far out there, and the idea they were going with wasn't used in subsequent routes. Maybe they had more to go with, but they just shelved her for just being a Joe character. The 7th is the true route and it's fine. There's a high in the middle and it was led to it well, but there was also a lot of missed potential. A lot of the side characters could have enhanced the whole process, but they didn't do much with them. And I think that's the underlying theme I'm going through this time around. That is just fine, it's overall streamlined well, but I'm probably going to forget about this in a few months. I think the largest issue is that Sora stops feeling like a character and becomes more a plot device. He does what's needed, but a lot of other motions that should have been happening or being processed just die out quickly to continue to the next scene. The 8th section is technically the aftermath and can only be seen through the extras menu. Why they added an H scene with a character not even in the main plot is beyond me, and it almost made me want to drop a point from the score. Overall I gave it a 7, it's closer to a 6, and I know I have some other titles in the 6 that have higher moments, but the overall quality rarely dips, so I'm keeping it as a 7. Parts of the plot felt like they cut off a lot to save time because they felt like it would have been wasting the reader's time after already hitting the section's high point. And sometimes that's true, but in other sections I felt like maybe they should extend the sections before the high points so the progression would have felt more impactful to the end. So this is the spoilers, I'm not going to really explain anything, and this is more for people that already read it. The rest can still follow along, but you're just going to have to do a lot of massive leaps, I guess, I don't know. So there was a couple points in the plot that expected some bouts of explosive anger to happen, but they don't really show up. especially one with Mizuki where it felt like it was being built up for a scene, but then it was pretty milquetoast. Honestly, I thought they would go harder with Mizuki and a couple of the other characters. Her route handles that Sora can somehow find her, and the easy basis that like, well, he's connected to the pigeon mainframe, and therefore because the pigeons see her, he can also see her. Or that he can just make like a query in the system and it was like, oh, here she is. But it could also lead to Mizuki actually being a third user in the system, and they could have done some extra plot points with that. It would be interesting, but they just didn't go with it. Another thing, and honestly, I'm glad they didn't go along with it because it's just a Deus Ex Machina all over. Though I've seen it a couple of times where it ended up being really cool, but I don't know if they could handle this one. So because Tsubaki's route is going along into the true route shows that they can transfer a lot of data through the radio and having the pigeons just put it all into the system. All the know-how should be in there. Parts of it are explained like how Sora understands how to fix shit, and that's one that leads to say that he was in the system in like the first couple of sections. He's basically got tutorials in his brain. It's how the radios became a thing in the first place. Anyways, he has the know-how and he can probably explain to Tsubaki again. Technically, it should be in the system so she could just log in and learn it through that way. So really the whole waiting game in the finale where he has to wait 2 years for it to happen wasn't really needed because once they figured out how to improve the system, they could just send the whole encrypted data through the pigeons again, thus taking away any stakes. Really, they could have even done it where Azana gets all the data and resolves everything before the plot even happens. And some people really hate that kind of plot point. It's like, well, thank you for ruining the whole plot. Nothing ever happened. Great. Another one's like, hey, that was pretty cool, you did it well. Then you can introduce more plot sections with it where it's like, okay, that's gone, but now Izana's trying to incorporate all the freaking relationships back. Now Izana's not, a random ass villain for the whole world anymore. Everything works out fine. But honestly, I'm glad they didn't go with it because it's kind of hard to do and it's more likely just a better idea just to go with something simple. That's about it for this one. Technically, I finished Snow before this one and I'm actually written it and it's already done. And I was editing the audio, but this is actually faster, I think, so that's why this was out first. Which kind of fucks it up because, now I'm gonna release Snow outside of the winter area, so that's kind of dumb. But it kind of makes sense in a way once you read the whole thing, so I was like, alright.